Welcome you all to this one-day conference on the deliberations of the 16th Finance Commission report that was placed in Parliament on the 1st February 2026, along with the Union Budget of 2026. The Finance Department Government of Telangana has willingly collaborated with our Assembly when approached with the idea of organizing this panel discussion. The initial idea to have a discussion on the 16th Finance Commission says, away from the nation capital Delhi and financial capital in the south. To have it in the south was motivated by Dr. Montex in Diwalia when he gave the lecture in memory of State Equality in December. And this was further endorsed by Dr. Subarav and Sanjay, and we have been following it up with the idea and have translated into this event. In that way, I think we would get the first mover advantage in organizing this discussion. First, today's chief guest, Sri Honorable Deputy Chief Minister Sri Bhatti Vikramarka Mallu has not died, and due to unavoidable circumstances, is not able to attend this event today. I welcome Dr. Subarav, who is former Governor of RBI. He will be giving away the inaugural address today. And he is known for his efficient steering of the RBI through turbulent years during the His recent book, Just a Mercenary and Autobiography, has been is known to all of us. And he represents the best combination of intellectual and professional focus. I welcome Sri K. Ramakrishna Rao, Chief Secretary, Government of Telangana. He has significantly contributed as Finance Secretary, preparing 14 budgets and enhancing financial systems for transparency in Telangana. Ramakrishna Rao willingly extended support in organizing this event. Sambit Kumar Subrahmanya, Principal Finance Secretary, could not do it to attend this event. I welcome today's keynote address of Dr. Montex in Diwalia, the prominent Indian economist and civil servant, formerly Deputy Chairman and a Admiration Award. He was Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, and as Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission, was engaged in preparation of 11th and 12th five-year plans, bringing out for the first time the concept of inclusive growth into planning. His eminent works in distribution of growth back in 1979, more recently on the story of India's high growth years are known to all of us. I welcome our Board of Governors, members of the Board of Governors, Professor J. Mahinder and Abhimani Kanpal here to attend this event. I welcome the panelists for today's discussion, having expertise in the three important areas of vertical and horizontal distribution, grant saving, and fiscal consolidation. That's the three areas that we are going to discuss in this one-day conference. Sri Anika, member in the 16th Finance Commission, is here with us. Hasik Rabu will be joining soon. His former finance minister, Government of Jammu and Kashmir. And we have with us directors and faculty from Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, Madras School of Economics, NIPFP, and Fiscal Policy Institute, and RBI. I welcome all. And we also have with us bureaucrats with expertise in finance matters and also eminent economic journalists. This one-day conference serves as a platform bringing together economics, practitioners, policymakers to discuss the pertinent issues on the recommendations of the 16th Finance Commission. I welcome the invited participants from different academic institutions in the city, Hyderabad Central University, Usmania University, and IIT Hyderabad, who are here, and also from government departments, mostly working in the broad area of economics and public finance, and faculty of Cesses and local press, press and electronic media from the newspapers. We look forward to an exciting discussion on various issues related to finance coming from the book. I now request the dignitaries to light the lamp and inaugurate the event. I request Sri Ramakrishna Rao to take over and start the proceedings.
Very good morning to all the distinguished participants in this conclave on 16th Finance Commission. Dr. Mantek Singh Atiwale, Dr. Subbarao, Professor Devji Garu, Dr. G. Reddy Garu, Sanjay Paru Garu, Dr. Jayaprakash Naran Garu, and the distinguished participants. It's a great honor and privilege for me, on behalf of the Govt of Telangana, to welcome you all on this recently brought out report of the 16th Finance Commission, which came in the public domain on the 1st of this month. So I think within a short period, we are having this assessment of the 16th Finance Commission's report. As you are aware, this Commission's report has a lot of strengths. It has broken ground in a lot of new ways, and at the same time, there is also a lot of stability. Any finance commission is always having this difficult task of balancing equity with efficiency, ensuring that the states which are economically poor do not feel left out. The transfers are done in a rational manner. The transfers are done in a manner which would not impede growth across the country. So, which is always a very, very difficult task. So, where it has succeeded and where there are still areas for improvement is always a question of lively debate. As Finance Secretary of Telangana for a considerable period of time, I would not like to really comment upon those aspects. But then there are other interesting aspects within the report I thought I would share with you. The path-breaking introduction of contribution of GDP is being widely commented. So definitely, that's a welcome move. But other than that, there are a lot of other interesting and thought-provoking ideas in the report. For instance, let me start from the end. The restructuring of the public sector enterprises. Because why I wanted to start from here? Because as usual, as with any report, the initial parts, the most important parts, get a lot of attention. There is a lot of debate. But I think this report has a lot of interesting ideas in other parts of the report. Like across the country and also in Telangana, we have a large number of public sector enterprises which are perennially loss-making, which have lost assets which are illiquid, and therefore, even though there is a possibility of monetizing these assets for various reasons, this is not being done. And therefore, the formula which is given by the Finance Commission, which is suggested by the Finance Commission, that if these PSCs are making losses in 3 out of the past 4 years, then they should be brought for discussion. What's the way forward for these PSCs is something which every state can seriously act upon. Because these large investments of public money into these enterprises are ultimately not yielding any results. So that is the first point that I wanted to touch upon. The second point is regarding the fiscal consolidation. The 3% of fiscal deficit for the states and 3.5% for the center, and the debt to GSTP like that. Once we look at the action taken report which is placed in the parliament by the union government, so definitely the 3% is accepted. The 3% limit on the states is accepted. But regarding the other 2 items, there is no definite conclusion there is no definite action taken which is placed by the Indian government. But most importantly, the problem of off-budget borrowings, which is resorted to especially in the Telugu land, both by Andhra Pradesh and Telangana in a very aggressive manner, which is sought to be covered. And from 2022 onwards, Government of India also has included these things and reduced the state's borrowings. At least those off-budget borrowings, where the debt and principal are being serviced by the state government, these are to be included within the overall debt of the state, the public debt of the state. So this is the same stand which is taken by the Finance Commission also. And I think this has reached a dangerous level. And therefore, rightfully, the Finance Commission has commented that we should cut down on these things and we should not resort to any fresh borrowing, off-budget borrowings. And we should ensure that over a period of time, the existing off-budget borrowings are also to be liquidated. I think this is a very, very welcome measure. But how do we do that? How do we implement is something which is fully time taker. The next issue that I would like to focus upon is the question of subsidies. Because India has now extraordinary digital public infrastructure, whereby it is possible to precisely push money to the last man and the last woman in every part of the country. The political establishment has used this very, very effectively to push large number of subsidies without any discrimination. So these universal DBT schemes run against the basic principles of public finance, of administrative efficiency, without excluding anybody who is not eligible. Now, this is the debate which I think Sixteenth Finance Commission has rightfully opened up. Because this burden on the states is day by day, it is increasing. These subsidies are increasing. And this has crowded out the public investment and the capital expenditure. So therefore, I think Finance Commission has rightfully commented upon these things. And I think every state needs to look at this particular matter also. But one area with the tax devolution, which I think has widely been, if not criticism, widely been commented upon, is the grand bargain which the Finance Commission talks about between the central and states regarding the cesses. So the problem of cesses is well known, that even though the devolution kept on increasing, especially from 32% to 40% due to the 14th Finance Commission, but the necessary amount of money which is flowing into the states has come down, or at least has remained stagnant because of the cesses. So therefore, this grand bargain, that is the reduction in the devolution to the states for increasing in the size of the pie by including the Cesses and Surcharges, is something which the Finance Commission suggested. It is a welcome measure, but I think several people have commented upon saying that this is only a suggestion, even though the Finance Commission would have given much better recommendations in these aspects. So these are some of the things which I thought would highlight. I'm sure the daily deliberations with all the distinguished economists, policymakers, people who have been the architects of much of the fiscal policy and monetary policy in India are here. So I'm sure with their deep insights, so today will be a very, very enriching and rewarding session for all of the participants. So on behalf of Government of Telangana, I welcome you all, and then we hope that we have a rich, deliberative and purposeful session today. Thank you very much. Now, I would request Dr. D. Subbarao Garu to give his inaugural address.
Chief Secretary Ramakrishna Rao Garu, our Chief Guest and Keynote Speaker, Dr. Montex Galvadia, Professor Devitt, and all the delegates. I was told late last night that I've got to inaugurate this seminar, whatever that means. But I understand that it's a special privilege. A particularly special privilege because I have no affiliation either with CES or with the government of Telangana. So thank you very much. As Professor Devitt mentioned, this seminar was triggered by two motivations. The first was Montex Galvadia. He delivered the DPR Little Memorial Lecture back in November, brilliant lecture, but he did that online. He could not travel to Hyderabad because of some infirmity. But at that time, he promised that he will come back to Hyderabad, and that encouraged us to organize this seminar. The second reason again is that Cess wanted to shift the intellectual discourse from Mumbai and Delhi to regional centers. Much of discussion on public finance management happens in Delhi and Mumbai. We hear the political voice from Delhi. We hear the economic and financial voice from Mumbai. We don't hear from regional centers like Chennai, Chandigarh, or Guwahati, and Gandhinagar. Very important that the voice from the peripheries of the country away to the center is heard. So I'm very glad that this seminar has materialized. Once the seminar organizers told me that I got given an inaugural speech, I struggled to determine what I should say. So late last night, I sat up and tried to put down some points. In particular, I want to make 3 points. The first point is that for all the acrimony, for all the complaints, for all the grievances, for all the griping we do about our sensitive relations, our federal structure, I want to say that our federal structure is a story of remarkable resilience. We don't often acknowledge it, but it is. If you look around the world today, look at other federations. Every major federation has a problem. Canada has the Quebec separation. Spain has the Catalan independence. Ethiopia and Nigeria are driven by ethnic stripes. Brazil, there is center-state issues because of Amazon deforestation. And most significantly, East Timor separated from Indonesia because of disputes over resource share. So by those international standards and by that international history, I believe we managed our center-state relations remarkably well. In fact, it's significant that the word federal is not used in our constitution. We're not a federation of states. We are a union of states. So quite different from other federations. Now, and what is a remarkable feat of political engineering, our constitution makers have blended unitary features with decentralizing features. Unitary features such as division of powers, a written constitution, and an independent judiciary with a relatively strong central government, emergency provisions, and appointed governors. It is this unique federal structure, what we call federal structure with unitary features, that has helped us navigate through the problems and the challenges of what is a very diverse country with a very diverse traditions and challenges. Much of the day, we're going to gripe about how the states are being, central and over them for central hegemony. But on top of all that, we've got to recognize that our federal structure is a story of remarkable resilience. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that state finances matter more than we tend to acknowledge. Throw your mind back to January, a month ago, in the run-up to the budget on the 1st of February, all the commentators, all the analysts, frantically, feverishly, spending their commentary on just one single question. Will the finance minister be able to deliver on the 4.4% of fiscal deficit target? As if the entire macroeconomic stability and our growth and development depended on that single metric. I understand and acknowledge that the center's fiscal deficit is important, remains important, but what is equally important, indeed even more important, is the fiscal management, and in particular, the fiscal deficit and debt management at the state level. What is a reality we often tend to ignore is that the fiscal center of gravity, indeed economic center of gravity, is shifting away from New Delhi to the states. Whether you take spending and taxing, whether you take borrowing, whether you take quality of expenditure, what states do matter. Take, for example, spending and taxation. We have a 60-40 story. 60-40 story. The center collects 60% of the combined revenue of the center and states. But let's keep only 40%. 60% states get to spend 60%. If you take the expenditures, the middle rate of that. The states get to spend 60%, the center gets to spend 40%. So there is an asymmetry there. So what the states do, for they spend as much as 60% matters. Take borrowing. Borrowing, for example. The center's fiscal deficit next fiscal is going to be 4.3% of GDP. This year, 4.4% of GDP. States together, 3%, maybe slightly over 3%. If you take the off-budget borrowing as well, maybe it will be about center states combined, it will be about 8%. What do those numbers tell us? Those numbers tell us that what the states borrow is about as much as the center borrows. And we know fiscal deficits are bad. Fiscal deficits are bad because they crowd out private investment. There's not all limited amount of savings in the economy. If both the public sector and the private sector compete for that, the public sector preempts the private sector and private investment gets crowded out. Fiscal deficits are bad because they raise the aggregate demand and slow inflation. Fiscal deficits are bad, as our history tells us, because they also can spill over into the external sector and cause balance of payments pressures, as we saw in 1991 and as we nearly saw in 2013. Fiscal deficit is a flow variable. We also have to take care of debt, the stock variable. Because here on you have fiscal deficits and the debt has to get unsustainable. So fiscal deficits of the state and debt sustainability at the state level matters much more than we acknowledge. The third dimension, take the quality of spending. The center spends on defense, on national security, but the states spend on sectors in areas which matter to our long-term growth and development. Education, health, local infrastructure. So this is what adds to productivity, this is what adds to efficiency, and this is what aids our long-term growth and efficiency. So the point I want to make is that how state finances are managed, public finance management at the state level matters much more than we acknowledge. The third point I want to make is that the growing strain in center-state relations is not good for our growth and development. There is a deepening cleavage between the center and state. We proudly talk about cooperative federalism, but what we practice we are having is combative federalism, which is often spilling into corrosive federalism. No, take the political dimension. There's a lot of acrimony among states, especially states ruled by non-NDA parties, about how the center drives love short over them, how they suffer because the center hasn't. One thing I've seen, I've worked in fiscal federalism for decades actually. Earlier on, 30 years ago, it used to be center versus states. Today it is center plus NDA ruled states versus non-NDA ruled states. We've just had the Justice Joseph Kurian report released in Chennai, appointed by the Tamil Nadu government. That report has made some significant recommendations, largely in the political and administrative dimension, but I have not seen the report fully, but I believe they've also addressed some of the fiscal issues, including rebalancing the federal structure, appointment of governors, review of laws and policies that dilute state powers, institutionalizing cooperative federalism. These are very important issues. But beyond that, if you take the fiscal dimension itself, even in the fiscal dimension, the cleavage is deepening. States complain that the space for their spending autonomy is getting increasingly limited. States complain that the space for their borrowing is getting increasingly limited. States complain that the space for resource raising is getting increasingly limited. And it's disconcerting that this cleavage is deepening without anyone trying to repair that. The reality today is that the political center of gravity of the country is in the north and the east. The economic center of gravity is in the south and the west. How do we balance this economic center of gravity versus the political center of gravity, and the pulls and pressures that come because of this is going to be a big challenge going forward. We all want Viksit Bharat. We want our country to be developed by 2047. The agenda for Viksit Bharat is very large, very complex. I don't want to get into that. But one of the items definitely on the agenda of the Viksit Bharat is structural reforms. Because Montek Singh Alwale is here, I want to mention this. We all talk about the 1991 reforms. Because blitzkrieg reforms, transformative, regime changing in many ways. They dealt with dismantling the license permit route, dismantling import controls, freeing up the external sector, opening up the financial sector. All of that could be done in an electric fashion without consulting states. In fact, the drive at that time used to be all the reforms came not even from the government of India, but from just the North Bloc. So today, you cannot implement the second generation reforms having to do with factor markets, land, labor, taxation, investment, without consulting and even the consent of states. So if we want Viksit Bharat, we want India to be a developed country by 2047. It's very important that we repair this deepening cleavage between the center and states. So I've talked about three broad points. Just to summarize, the first point is that for all the acrimony driving politics complaints, our story of federalism is a story of the multiple disciplines. The second is that state finances matter much more for our macroeconomic management, for our stability, for our growth and our development, much more than we take to acknowledge. The third is that it is very urgent and critical that we repair the deepening cleavage between the center and states. Finally, before I leave, I want to make a brief comment on the 16th Finance Commission report. In some sense, this report, and indeed this 16th Finance Commission, has been a textbook affair. In terms of reference, what proved the key, as per the Constitution, the government did not deviate even a letter, a word, from what is written in the Constitution, I believe for the first time ever. And even the Commission, I believe, have been very balanced. They did not go beyond their limit. They did not go for grandstanding. For some, they did not play God like, I don't want to say this in some, in a satirical manner, but previous Finance Commission played God, like giving something to each state. That is not the job of the Finance Commission. So I believe that this Finance Commission is stuck to its mandate, stuck to its terms of reference. Of course, as I said, we will write about it, we will grumble about it, we will complain about it. That's why we gathered here today. But amidst all that, I think the Finance Commission has done a very balanced job. I think we've got to keep that as an overarching idea as we deliberate in the course of the day. So once again, I want to congratulate Cesses and thank the government of Telangana and CS Sri Ramakrishna Rao Garu for organizing this seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Montek Singh Alwale to kindly answer.
Well, friends, good morning, and let me begin by thanking Revati for inviting me to this conference. You know, as was mentioned, I was here earlier on another CES occasion, and I happened to mention that we really should have another conference now that the Finance Commission report is about to be finished to discuss a lot of these issues. So I mean, this is the ultimate example of Atma Nirbharta. You suggest a conference and then you make sure to get invited to attend. Anyway, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And it's also great to follow my former colleague, Subarao, because he's actually said most of what I wanted to say. So if you allow me to use this keynote address to sort of share my thoughts about, how I approach the subject, because really I do want to endorse virtually everything that he said. We need to look at this occasion, not just to look at a report and to say, I agree with this formulation, that formulation. Actually, the real thing is that the whole Finance Commission, as a kind of institutional context, was invented at a different time. I mean, look at the political context at the time when the Constitution was being written. Therefore, immediately after the partition of the country, those days, I think, Panikkar used to write about centrifugal forces, great concern that we're going to hold the thing together. And after all, the independence movement had sort of comprehensively rejected the so-called cabinet plan, which involved all kinds of groupings of provinces with options for provinces to opt out, etc. They must have been quite concerned that the country must hold together. It's been partitioned once, but let's make sure that it holds together. So very, very strong, if you like, a political consensus to have a centralized center, a centralizing center. Second, planning, centralized planning, government control, all of that. Actually, if you go back to the original context in which the Finance Commission used to work, they used to look at how to make sure that the non-planned needs of the states are met. Planned needs were going to be met by all kinds of other transfers done by the center through the planning commission, etc., etc. And there was a presumption in those days that non-planned is actually pretty routine. Although today, non-planned includes all of human development. So the idea that it's just a matter of little details that need to be filled out, and therefore every state must certainly have, shouldn't have a revenue deficit, made a certain amount of sense. Over time, the fact of the matter is that if you have an utterly irresponsible approach to expanding revenue expenditure, there's no reason to presume that you should get a central devolution in order to make sure that you don't have a revenue deficit. And you're having a revenue deficit, you should do something about it yourself. So I think we need to rethink how much both the politics and, if you like, the economics and the global context of that economics has changed, and then ask, is the sort of Finance Commission fit for purpose the way it is actually conceived? And my feeling is it is, by the way, this particular report is well worth reading. I think Panagri has done a wonderful job, it's extremely well written, and even a person only moderately interested in these subjects can quite happily read through it with very good sense. With nice summaries of what all the earlier finance commissions have said. But in the end, it is so constrained because basically the only constitutional thing that they really have to do is to decide the vertical devolution of taxes, how much to the states and how much to the center. And with the GST, etc., that tax system having been sorted out, that's a very simple calculation. You can make it complicated, but in the end, it's not that much of a problem. There is a problem with the growth of cesses. And I think that, to my mind, it's totally clear to me that this is something that the Commission should have addressed. Because nothing stops a government from levying all kinds of cesses and saying, well, these are not taxes, these are cesses for specific. I mean, for example, you could have an adaptation cess to deal with climate change, mitigation cess to deal with climate change, none of which would be shared. I just don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think this fundamental question, I don't think it was posed to them on their terms of reference. That's the other thing, that the Finance Commission is tends to be constrained by its terms of reference. But then it has an opportunity to make all sorts of other suggestions, which the government is under no compulsion to actually listen to. So I think one of the things that needs to be addressed, even in a narrow context, is this issue of cess. But not more broadly. I think we need to go back and address two other things which are at the root of what is today putting, if you like, a bit of a strain on the federal structure, preventing it from being truly cooperative and pushing it into what Subbarao has very rightly described as combative federalism. You don't want combative. You want competitive federalism, but not combative federalism. So there's cooperative federalism, there's competitive federalism, and there's combative federalism. The last is actually what you want to avoid. Cooperative and competitive, that can be combined with each other. Now step back and say, what is it that we need to address here to make it less combative? Number one is clearly issues related to delimitation, which are around the line. And I mean, this is much talked about. I'm not sure what the government can do. In the past, we've shown a lot of wisdom because we were supposed to redo all this, we postponed it for 25 years. Now, some people might say, well, why not postpone for another 25 years? Because, you know, one of the things that's happening is that the rate of growth of the population is converging. I mean, we're seeing the end of a period when the earlier southern states were able to bring down population growth rate, fertility very substantially. Northern states also did it, but their fertility is still quite high. However, it is coming down. Maybe 25 years later, that will also have come down, and then you can take a considerable. One of the economists from the formerly from the JNU, Santosh Mehrotra, produced a paper where he has drawn upon flexibility that exists in the Constitution itself, which says that when it comes to delimitation, it should reflect the population as far as is practical. So it is not a categorical statement, reflect the population period. It is as far as a practicable consideration. I think our constitutional drafters have to be given a huge amount of credit and cleverness for adding these little phrases which later on give you flexibility rather than condemn you to rigidity. So what he's suggesting is that he's accepting that the number of seats must increase. But what he's saying is that the present number of seats should be frozen on the basis of present criteria, and the additional seats should be distributed on the basis of a mixed criteria, in which population growth would be one factor, but other factors will also be taken. So that opens up a huge array of possibilities that if you are interested, you should just ask ChatGPT or Copilot to suggest different ways in which you can come to different conclusions. But I think it's quite clear that if you get a complete transformation of political power, as might happen in a very simplistic kind of application of the delimitation principle, you will really put a big strain on the system. So that's one other issue. I think a related issue we have to think about is the distribution of subjects according to the state list, the union list, and the concurrent list. Now, when this was done, it was in a world in which was sort of assumed that any expansion of the power of the center will always be to the advantage of everybody. And those are the days of planning and what have you. But technically, you could raise the question that should the concurrent list exist at all? That's a bit of an extreme position. Or should it be drastically reduced? I would be in favor of that. By the way, things have been moved from the state list to the concurrent list, which were originally concurrent lists, but have been in the state list, but were moved to the concurrent list, allowing the center to do a lot of intervention. Now, this intervention was largely defended, if you like, on the grounds that the center would be paying the money. But there's no guarantee that the center would be paying the money. So quite frankly, I don't see that there is any reason for a subject like education to be taken out of the state list. I mean, if the center wants to incentivize states to run schools in a particular way, nothing stops them from putting forward central school assistance programs with central incentives. And states can do it or not do it as they like. So, I mean, this is just one example. It is certainly true that if you look at development economics thinking today, most people think that the role of human capital, and this has been known since 1956, Solo's original article, that the role of human capital in promoting technological progress has been massively understated. I mean, what used to be called technical progress, a lot of it is really improvements in human capital. I mean, it's one thing to have labor as an input, an undifferentiated bunch of possibly disciplined but unskilled labor. It's quite another to have a bunch of innovative, highly skilled, technically competent labor. And technology diffusion is not unconnected with these two things. So the original idea that technology falls like manna from heaven has been rejected quite comprehensively. It doesn't happen that way. I mean, there's learning by doing. The systems you have encourage the growth of technological progress, and your growth outcomes are going to depend on technological progress. Let's be clear about that. Now, if those things are really true, and if human capital, which by the way includes our whole health, so child health, maternal health, human capital, all of these things, in most countries would be left much more to lower level and not national level direction. Now, when I say lower level, I mean in India, after all, UP has, when last counted, about 250 million people. That's not a very small size by any means. This raises the third question. I mean, should we seriously think about creating a framework in which large states are automatically rebundled into smaller states? In my view, they should be. It makes no sense at all to have a federation where some states have 2 and 3 million people and some states have 250 million people. Now, there is no organized effort in which this is actually going to be done. These thoughts have been articulated before. I think there was, Sanjay probably will certainly remember and maybe he would know. I think in the 1970s, Ramesh Thakur had once suggested to Mr. Gandhi that the United States has 52 states or whatever it is they have there. And in his view, India should have 52 states. And he had sent her a map of dividing up Maharashtra, divided into Vidarbha, separated, Karnataka also, etc. etc. And his view was that if Punjab and Haryana can be separated, both doing, Punjab not doing that well, but Haryana is certainly doing very well. Not bad idea to split out the largest states. I don't think that there's any one institution that will bring these issues up for discussion. I'm not sure how these issues should be surfaced. And there's no question in my mind that, the danger of excessive power being excessive power at the national level being concentrated in, let's say, one state or two states, which happens when those states are very, very large. Even if those areas are adequately represented, but there are 3 and 4 states over there, it could be a much more, much less threatening kind of position. I mean, coalitions across states and commonalities across states would be easier to work out because there'd be multiple actors. That's the problem. So I think it's not fair to expect to ask the question, has the Finance Commission addressed these issues? They're probably not even proper for the Finance Commission to address these issues. And that's why I said that I think it's a very good report. And those of you, I mean, usually government reports are not very well written. This is a very well written report. I really urge you all to read it. But I think having read it, I wouldn't bother very much about the particular formula used. You can improve it a little bit or not improve it. I think the big thing they've done, which is I think quite sensible, is by introducing the contribution to GDP as a factor in determining shares. They have responded to a feeling that was quite widespread in the South, that look, we're contributing to most of the GDP and we also limited to the growth of population, which is a good thing to do. And we're losing out as a result. Well, the familiar formula addresses that to some extent. Otherwise, quite frankly, every state will look at it and say, if its share has gone down, there's something wrong. And we'll pick a whole number, which is fine, it could happen anyway. All said and done, these changes are so small that over time, the future of a state is very rarely affected by the kind of very marginal changes that are likely in state's share if you use a somewhat different formula. But I think the issues that I've raised, many of which have been hinted by Mr. Sundaram, they're the really important ones that we need to think about. To what extent should the center let the states be? That's one important thing. In the days of planning, this was not possible because the center wouldn't let anyone be. It wanted to tell anybody what to do. But in the days of a free market economy, that's what happens anyway. And today, quite frankly, if you talk about ease of doing business, the biggest is half the problems that businessmen have, and not just with the central bureaucracy, they're with the state. And we don't have, in my view, we don't have an adequate interaction in state-level businesses and state-level governments. This has developed over many years at the central government level, very little at the state government level. And as a matter of fact, we don't even have institutions that are actually analyzing what are the development constraints that affect a particular state. It was my feeling when I was the planning commissioner and chairman that the single biggest weakness of our analysis then was that there was no one looking at each state and saying, look, the constraint in this state is the following. In fact, every state, there will be a report on what it's doing in agriculture, what it's doing in industry, what it is doing in this, that, and the other. Pretty much identical to what would have been done in an economic survey for the country as a whole. Whereas the truth of the matter is that if these states were looked at by any international agency, they would say, well, look, as far as you're concerned, I mean, this is what matters, this doesn't matter. And you better bring your best quality civil servants and experts and all the rest of it to focus on these problems. And I think they need institutional research, institutional support. We commissioned, we said, let's have a state development report prepared by a state institution. And I think I had instituted a grant of 20 lakhs, which the Planning Commission would give to every state if they would, in order to let them commission someone to do a state development report. There was very little pickup, but there was some. I mean, this is an important thing. Some states actually had institutions, research institutions, that were actually studying the development constraints. Others didn't have any. I mean, there were people studying national problems, but it's not studying the state problem at all. So frankly, I think these are the things that we need to go to. And I mean, there's lots of development work that has been done, and this is a complaint really not against the center, but state governments, that India is characterized by having the least devolution below the state, in other words, below the state to the third level of government, the Panchayati Raj and urban local authorities. I mean, by any measure of devolution there, we really look at it. And there's no reason. I mean, we always talked about these institutions, PRI, this, that, and the other. Now, in the Constitution, nothing stops the state government from devolving resources down if it wants to. But the pressure is always put on the central government. Why aren't you doing it? I used to defend our position against all these development critics by saying, listen, there's nothing the central government can do under the Constitution. If there is a chief minister that decides as a political decision that I want to decentralize to the third level of government and reach global standards, he doesn't need the permission of the central government to do it at all. They do it themselves. And in that context, there are 2 points that I want to pick up, which I think Rao also mentioned. That is the issue of states feel that they've been denied resources. I mean, denied resources for taxing purpose. Now, the fact of the matter is that, all of agriculture cannot be taxed by the sector, it can only be taxed by the states. But is it the assumption that agriculture must forever not pay any income tax, irrespective of the size of the holding? It's very difficult to defend that. And I mean, if you have holdings which are of a modest size and they're diversified, they can certainly be generating reasonably high income levels, coming to the bottom of the income tax. That's pointing. And that tax would go 100% to the states, wouldn't be taken away by the center. The other area, which is really appalling, is property taxation. Now, for a variety of reasons, if you construct an index, cut out the smaller houses, define it only as middle class, whatever we want. Let's say somebody who, I would say somebody who relies on some motorized transport. If you don't want to say motorized transport, you can just say, let's say a car, four-wheel vehicle. And then do a survey that what is the property tax that this group is paying as a percentage of a reasonable market value of property. Very difficult to calculate the real market value, but reasonable market value. It's amazing. You will find that you and I and our relatives and friends are paying as a proportion of the value of the properties we live in, something like 100th the share that our friends in America, etc., pay. And all of this group has NRI relatives who come and they say, well, roads are terrible, lights don't work, etc., etc. And these guys just say, well, corruption, inefficiency. They don't point out that nobody's paying for these things in urban areas to actually come up to a minimum standard. Now, this is the real issue because property tax rates are not fixed by the municipality, they're fixed by the state. But the revenues accrue to the municipality. So it is never in the interest of a state government to do an unpopular thing like raising property tax rates. If you really calculate it, today increasingly, at least in the South, there is a perception that however the world is moving with a very fragmented and uncertain globalization, but it's not moving backward very rapidly like before. There will be we are after whatever President Trump does, which only he knows, or in the Vedic chant, maybe even he doesn't know. But there's a lot of uncertainty there. But other than that, I think we are ourselves joining FTAs and so forth and so on. And in this, investment is very critical because the idea that you will have a great export boom without being able to attract the investment from the companies that organize these supply chains is no longer regarded as serious. You want to attract investment. And if you want to attract investment, and I mean, the South is much more in a position where it is attracting that investment, and it could attract much more. And this city is one of those which could do exactly that. The biggest constraint that people point out is the quality of the city infrastructure. I mean, quite frankly, I mean, look 20 years ahead. Either this is going to be sorted out or not. And it is not going to be sorted out unless we sufficiently empower the urban local bodies and the panchayat, but urban local bodies. And empower also means empower them to tax. The biggest thing on taxation there is property tax. Don't expect to get this from the Finance Commission. I mean, they might pontificate on the subject, but it's well outside their sphere of influence. So, when I said we need this discussion, we need a discussion which is not the kind of what in the North is called a tutu-man discussion, blaming each other. I think we need to sit down and say that, look, the institutional structure in which we discuss these things is simply no longer fit for purpose. How do we change all of this? And God knows how you get enough of a political consensus. But quite frankly, at the moment, the discussion is so fragmented that you don't get a view that a group of whatever the intelligentsia of Hyderabad or the intelligentsia of Chennai or the intelligentsia of Mumbai or Bengaluru for that matter, they all have the same view on how to move forward. And I think that's really what I hope in this seminar we get a better idea of. It's a huge area, and I think younger people particularly would be well advised to do a little more work on this. And the best work you could do is to hold other countries as the benchmark. I don't necessarily mean European and American cities, but compare us with Indonesia, compare us with Malaysia, compare us with other Asian countries and other Latin American countries. And I think people should know to what extent we are, as it were, out of the mainstream in these dimensions. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Amlaleti. Thank you, Dr. Subbarao. I think remarkable comments were made by both our distinguished economists and experts. Dr. Subbarao sir spoke about three main areas with respect to the center-state relationships in general, and then the 16th Finance Commission report in particular. I think we have even moved beyond the point of come back to combustible kind of federalism today, center-state kind of relationships. So I think there are a lot of areas which you have pointed out. The differences between the revenue raising and the expenditure patterns between the sectors and the state asymmetry which exists between them. And also the total textbook kind of nature of this particular report, sticking to the terms of reference very, very closely on these issues very closely. And then Sir Martek sir, of course, put the whole thing in a completely historical context, starting from the constitution makers thought about these things, and then he gave us a totally different perspective on the institutional architecture, and then the way that we need to look at these issues in a different manner, and especially to come up with state level initiatives. How the way Subbarao sir told the differences between the economic gravity and the political gravity, and similarly the intellectual consensus and gravity also. Many of these bigger districts, bigger cities, I think they need to come out with these things. So several important and interesting points were made, sir. So now with this, we come to the closure of the inaugural session, and then we have a team debate now, and then afterwards we have the first technical session. Thank you very much.
Chief Secretary, Commissioner Overall, any points were raised related to the Finance Commission report as well as beyond that. And this would be a good curtain raiser for the discussions in the day that proceeds.